Flames lick the night sky. The air is thick with smoke, screams, and the bitter stench of burning flesh. Imagine standing inside a city where the streets themselves are on fire, where every corner echoes with the clash of steel and the cries of the dying. Families clutch one another in the shadows, praying to gods who no longer answer. Above them, the roar of collapsing buildings drowns out their prayers. This is not myth. This is not legend. This was once one of the richest, most powerful cities the world had ever known. Carthage, the city that had rivaled Rome for centuries. The city of Hannibal, whose armies had marched across the Alps to terrify Italy itself. The city that had once commanded the Mediterranean. And yet on this final night in 146 BCE, Carthage was no longer a rival, it was prey. The Roman legions had breached its walls, and now they poured in, street by street, house by house, slaughtering without mercy. For 6 days the city burned. For 6 days the defenders fought with desperate fury. And on the 7th day, Carthage ceased to exist. But here is the question. How does a city so great, so defiant, end in such horror? How did Carthage fall from riches and empire to ashes and chains? To answer, we must step inside those last desperate days, where men, women, and children chose between fire, sword, and slavery. Where the greatest rival Rome ever faced was wiped from the earth, its memory cursed, its ruins left as a warning to the world. Stay with me, because before this story ends, you will walk through the final hours of Carthage, and what you'll see will haunt you, just as it haunted Rome for centuries. Carthage before the fall. To understand the horror of Carthage's last days, we must first understand what Carthage was. Carthage was no mere city, it was an empire, a maritime power born from Phoenician traders who sailed west centuries earlier. On the coast of North Africa, across the sea from Sicily, they built a city of harbors and markets, a city where wealth poured in from every corner of the Mediterranean. Its ships carried silver from Spain, grain from Africa, ivory and gold from deep within the continent, incense from Arabia. Carthage was a city of merchants, but also of warriors. Its army was famous for elephants that trampled enemies, mercenaries from every land, and generals who studied war like an art. For centuries, Carthage and Rome eyed each other warily, like predators circling the same prey. They were alike in ambition, different in spirit. Rome was a republic of soldiers, Carthage a republic of merchants. Both wanted control of the Mediterranean, and there was room for only one. The clash came in 3 brutal conflicts, the Punic Wars. In the first war, Rome seized Sicily, breaking Carthage's naval supremacy. In the second, Carthage struck back with its most brilliant son, Hannibal. With his elephants and his hardened veterans, he crossed the Alps and tore through Italy. For years, Rome trembled, its legions crushed in battle after battle. But in the end, even Hannibal could not break Rome. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Rome turned the tide, and Carthage was humbled. By the time of the Third Punic War, Carthage was no longer the empire it had been. It was weakened, disarmed, forced to pay Rome tribute. Yet it was still wealthy, still proud, still defiant. And in Rome, many feared that as long as Carthage existed, it remained a threat. One voice was louder than the rest. Cato the Elder. An old senator, he ended every speech, no matter the subject, with the same chilling words. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. And Rome listened. In 149 BCE, Roman legions crossed the sea once more. They demanded Carthage surrender completely. Its weapons, its fleet, even its city itself. They ordered the people of Carthage to abandon their home and move inland, leaving the great city to be demolished stone by stone. The Carthaginians refused, and so the siege began. Behind the massive triple walls of Carthage, fortifications so thick they seemed unbreakable, the citizens prepared for war. They melted bronze statues to forge weapons. Women cut off their hair to make bowstrings. Old men and young boys took up arms. This would not be an easy conquest. Carthage was cornered, desperate, and willing to fight to the very last breath. For Rome, it was no longer about victory, it was about annihilation. The siege begins. The Roman legions landed in Africa in 149 BCE. their camps spreading across the plains before the great city. Their commanders were confident, surely Carthage, weakened and disarmed by decades of Roman demands, would fall quickly. They were wrong. Carthage's walls loomed above them, 3 massive lines of stone, nearly 40 feet high, reinforced with towers. Behind them, over 200,000 men, women, and children braced for the storm. The city's harbors still opened onto the sea, where desperate shipwrights worked day and night, rebuilding a fleet from scraps. The Romans tried a direct assault. Siege towers, rams, scaling ladders, all hurled at the walls. But the Carthaginians fought with a fury born of despair. They poured boiling pitch onto the attackers. They hurled rocks, flaming torches, and even burning jars of oil. Women and children joined the defense, running along the walls, carrying water, weapons, and stones. The Romans reeled back in shock. Carthage would not die quietly. When Roman commanders ordered the city's weapons surrendered, the Carthaginians had lied. Within weeks, they had forged tens of thousands of swords and shields, 300 catapults, and countless javelins. The bronze from sacred statues was melted down into blades. The very symbols of their gods became instruments of war. And in the harbors, a miracle took shape. From abandoned wood, from shipwrecks and scraps, Carthage's shipwrights built a fleet. 50 new warships, crafted in secret. When they finally sailed, Roman sailors were stunned to see Carthage rising again from the ashes of defeat. For months, battles raged both on land and sea. Roman soldiers pushed closer, building siege works, tightening their grip. Carthaginian raiders struck back, setting fire to Roman engines, slipping through gaps to attack the camps. Inside the walls, the situation grew desperate. Food grew scarce. Horses, dogs, even rats became part of the diet. Disease spread in the crowded streets, yet still the people fought on. 3 years passed. 3 years of blood and fire, of attack and counterattack. The Romans grew frustrated, humiliated that this broken city had held out so long. But under the leadership of a new commander, Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of the famous Scipio Africanus who had once defeated Hannibal, Rome grew ruthless. Scipio was relentless. He rebuilt discipline, tightened the noose, and slowly strangled the city. He cut off the harbors, starved the people, and ordered constant assaults on the walls. And at last, in 146 BCE, the defenses cracked. The Romans breached the city. What followed was not war, it was slaughter. The fall of the city. The breach had been made. Roman soldiers poured into Carthage like a flood unleashed. For 3 years, the walls had held them out. Now the city itself became the battlefield. The streets were narrow, twisting, packed with barricades. Every house was a fortress, every rooftop a vantage point. The Carthaginians fought like cornered animals. Men hurled javelins from windows. Women dropped stones and boiling oil. Children carried buckets of fire to rain down upon the invaders. The Romans advanced inch by inch. It was not conquest, it was slaughter in slow motion. Day 1, smoke rose from the harbors as the Roman fleet burned what remained of Carthage's ships. The city was cut off from the sea. Starvation turned into hopelessness. Hopelessness into madness. Day 2, whole districts set ablaze. The flames spread uncontrollably, leaping from roof to roof. Families fled the fire only to fall into Roman blades. Screams echoed through streets that had become rivers of blood. Day 3, the Romans began the work of erasure. Buildings were torn down stone by stone, temples desecrated, statues smashed to rubble. Where once merchants sold ivory and spices, now corpses lay piled in the gutters. Still, the Carthaginians would not yield. Day 4, the fighting reached the Byrsa, the high citadel of Carthage. Here, thousands of defenders and civilians had gathered. Barricades of timber and stone turned streets into mazes of death. The Romans advanced house by house, breaking through walls instead of doors, tearing roofs apart to attack from above. Each home became a tomb. Day 5, the last defenders retreated to the great temple of Eshmun, Carthage's god of healing. It became their final sanctuary. Families huddled inside, soldiers prepared for the inevitable. When the Romans set it alight, the flames consumed them all. Mothers clutched infants as fire closed around them. Warriors charged into the inferno rather than surrender. The temple collapsed in a roaring blaze, and with it, Carthage's last hope. Day 6, the city was silent but for the crackle of fire. Those who survived the flames and the sword, perhaps 50,000 in all, were dragged into chains. Men, women, children alike were sold into slavery, scattered across the empire that had once feared them. By the 7th day, Carthage was no more. Scipio Aemilianus, standing amid the ruins, is said to have wept. Watching the city burn, he murmured lines from Homer, that a day would come when Rome, too, would fall. Even in victory, he saw the warning. But the Senate had its will. Carthage had been erased. Its fields were cursed, its ruins left as a scar upon the earth. For centuries, the phrase would echo in Roman memory. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed, and destroyed it was. Yet the silence of the dead carried its own question. What did Rome fear so much that it felt compelled not just to defeat Carthage, but to annihilate it? Was this victory, or was it murder on a scale so vast that history itself still trembles? Aftermath and legacy. The flames died, but Carthage did not rise again. When the smoke cleared, the Romans stood among blackened ruins. What had once been gleaming white walls and bustling markets was now ash and rubble. The city that had rivaled Rome for centuries was erased in a single week of fire. The survivors, 50,000 men, women, and children, were chained and sold into slavery. Their lives scattered to the corners of the Roman world, their city gone forever. Families who had walked the streets of Carthage for generations now belonged to strangers, their names reduced to numbers on an auction block. And Rome celebrated. The Senate declared the Third Punic War finished. The greatest enemy of the Republic had been destroyed. Roman writers spoke of it as justice, a cleansing, a final victory. They repeated Cato's words as though prophecy had been fulfilled. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed, and so it was. But not all Romans felt triumph. Scipio Aemilianus, the man who commanded the final assault, reportedly wept as he watched the flames consume the city. He whispered lines from Homer's Iliad, words spoken about the fall of Troy. A day will come when sacred Ilium shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain. When asked why he wept, Scipio said that he feared the same fate would one day come to Rome itself. He had destroyed Carthage, yes, but in its ashes he saw the future of all empires. The memory of Carthage haunted history. Roman children grew up hearing tales of Hannibal, of elephants marching across the Alps, of battles that had once brought Rome to the brink of ruin. Carthage had been more than an enemy. It had been a mirror, a reminder that Rome was not untouchable. By destroying Carthage so completely, Rome proved its power, but it also revealed its fear. And centuries later, when Rome itself crumbled, when its walls fell to fire and sword, when its people were scattered, many remembered Scipio's words, "No empire, no matter how great, is eternal." Today, the ruins of Carthage still lie on the coast of Tunisia. Broken stones, scattered foundations, fragments of walls, the faint whispers of a city that once commanded the seas. Tourists walk its remains, unaware that beneath their feet lie the ashes of a civilization erased. The story of Carthage is not simply the story of Rome's triumph. It is the story of what happens when fear turns to destruction, when victory becomes annihilation. It asks us, when does conquest cross into cruelty? When does triumph become tragedy? Carthage did not just fall, it was silenced. Its voice was torn from history, its culture burned away, its people reduced to shadows. But even in silence it speaks, and it reminds us of the oldest truth of all, that every empire believes itself eternal until the day the fire comes for it too.